for the gLOCAL Week, along with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the Evaluation Office, and the Independent Office of Evaluation of the IFAD, of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. I'm very happy to welcome you to this. That is the third session, gLOCAL session we have this week. It will offer a platform for reflecting on the challenges and on the opportunities that this last year has offered for commissioners and for consultants in evaluation practice. So I'll just go through the agenda of this 1 hour together. So if Angelo, if you could share the agenda. There's the music coming up again. Okay, we'll have some opening remarks by Masahiro Igarashi, is the director of the Evaluation Office of FAO. Then we'll have Aurélie Larmoyer from the Evaluation Office of FAO and Owen Molloy from the Evaluation Office of IFAD, that will set the stage of the discussion today on building on national expertise for adaptive evaluation practice. And then we'll have a panel discussion with 3 consultants who have worked with the evaluation offices of FAO and IFAD: Arjuman Nizami from Pakistan, Khalid El Harizi and Mustafa El Haiba, both from Morocco. But let me now hand over to Masahiro Igarashi for his opening remarks. He's the director of the Office of Evaluation of FAO, and he's also the chair of the United Nations Evaluation Group. So over to you, Masa, and thanks to all for coming.
Thank you, Renata, and let me welcome everybody to the session. Just let me share the screen. Okay, just a minute. How do I? Just for a moment. How to, sorry, view full screen, not full screen. Okay, today, screen just a minute. So I have to do like this. Okay, today the topic is about building on national evaluation expertise for adaptive evaluation. And I would like to welcome all of you, and especially those from EvalForward. A lot of discussion on this topic today is prompted by COVID-related restrictions. However, I'm hoping that the attention to use the national evaluation expertise will remain as in the new way of doing business. In fact, we have been working on this for past 15 years. It is therefore gratifying to see EvalForward flourishing, but let me start with why we need to develop and work with national evaluation system and expertise.
Masa, sorry, did you want to share your presentation? Okay, because okay. Angelo can share it for you.
Okay, I have a little bit of problem here. Can Angelo do that? Okay, thank you. Next Angelo. Slide, please. Okay, I always start my speech with this story that the development cooperation paradigm has shifted in the 1990s. In 1970s and 80s, questions were raised whether the foreign aid, as it has been practiced, were effective or not. A lot of thinking was done in the 1990s, leading to the Millennium Declaration in 2000 and the Paris Declaration in 2005. Next slide, please. So what has changed? In essence, under the new paradigm, development is considered not as something that is to be provided and taught, but an indigenous and dynamic process that should be supported and facilitated. The driver of this process are the national actors, the government, the private sector, the civil society, and the people themselves. Having given the national actors the driver's seat, the international partners demanded that there should be a set of policy goals and a plan to achieve them as a condition for continued financing and support. Hence, many developing countries prepared national development strategies and plans and agreed on policy goals. As a global framework of these policy goals, the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, were agreed. Next slide, please. What does this signify for evaluators? Instead of focusing on a particular intervention and assessing its effectiveness, impact, and efficiency, the evaluators are called for in assessing the overall policy effectiveness in achieving those policy goals. Evaluations are now to be defined and scoped by policy goals rather than interventions. Coupled with rapid evolution in information and communication technology, we saw an eruption in the demand for public sector accountability in many parts of the developing world. Now, the mass demonstrations are somewhat subsided. With the democratization of the means of mass communication, the people are more than ever conscious about the need to keep the public sector to account. Here, the evaluators can play an important role. It is to provide to the public discourse rational and evidence-based arguments for deciding on policy directions. Some advanced thinkers said that evaluation must therefore become a tool for democracy. Next slide, please. The significance of having national evaluation culture and expertise is evident. Only the locally based evaluators can have a full understanding of the social, economic, cultural, and political context and dynamics. It is a mission of national evaluators, I would say, whether in developed or developing country, to cultivate the evaluation culture and make use of their expertise. Next slide, please. Now, assessing the effectiveness towards policy goals means you must deal with the complexity of dynamic and multi-sectoral processes. My proposal is to see it as an adaptive system and apply a more real-time approach to evaluations. That is, to observe and collect information as things develop. This can be done only by those who are there in the countries. I will not elaborate further about this, since it will be another lecture, but we'll soon publish a blog post summarizing the idea. Next slide, please. So let me finish my statement by showing you some quotations. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you, and hope you have a good discussion today.
Thank you, Maza, for this introduction to the session today. I just now would like to hand over to Owen and Aurélie for their laying the ground from their perspective and their experience over the last year. Owen, please, to you, or Aurélie, I don't know who wants to start.
It's my turn this time.
Yes.
Thank you, Renata. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody. I'm delighted to participate in this session today, and I very much look forward to exchanging on this theme, which is very dear to my heart. When we saw the theme of the gLOCAL this year, Owen and I got together and really wanted to present some of the reflections that have been inspired by the new way of working, in which we've been all propelled a bit against our will a year ago. As indeed, COVID, nobody will challenge that, I guess, has brought about many changes. And most of these changes were forced on us, owing in particular to travel restrictions as far as evaluation is concerned. Still, when reflecting about it, we believe that some of the changes that have come about in our evaluation practice could represent a positive evolution. So we thought it merited reflection on what those new practices are, just recognizing, acknowledging those practices, and trying to draw the lessons as to which are the practices that we could or should keep or even promote, and under what circumstances. So, I mean, for instance, most obvious example is the reduction of international flights that have been, by all account, a positive side effect of the pandemic. And it's as if, although we've been talking about reducing the carbon footprint of evaluation, as many other fields, for a long time, we were missing a trigger, and COVID-19 has been that trigger somehow. So I'm not going to develop further. I think now Owen may want to speak a little bit about some of the other positive changes that you have noted in the Independent Evaluation Office of IFAD. Over to you, Owen.
Sure. Thank you, Aurélie, and thank you, Masa and Renata and the organizers and everyone for turning up for this event. You know, indeed, Aurélie, you know, for us here at the IFAD, Independent Office of Evaluation, you know, we had some cases where there was no international travel whatsoever and no field travel. But, you know, we also did have some cases where national consultants undertook data collection in the field, in communities, you know, so we evaluated each situation as it arose. But, you know, where there was field travel, of course, it was undertaken only in the strictest observance of safety protocols, you know, in adherence to regulations and guidelines, you know, to limit the spread of COVID, obviously. But, you know, in that context, some of our biggest concerns from, you know, from us as commissioners were, well, one, of course, how to ensure the safety and well-being of our team members, of stakeholders and of communities, you know, so that was our primary concern. But secondly, given that we were constrained in what we could do for our evaluations, a big concern was, how do we maintain methodological rigor, you know, and reduce the chances of biases? And then linked to this, how do we maintain credibility? How do we ensure that our evaluation is ultimately believed and that there's buy-in by the stakeholders? So some practices we introduced that emerged, you know, to overcome some of these restrictions imposed on us by COVID. Well, we very much focused on strengthening triangulation of evidence. This is something that we always do in any case, but I think COVID really made us focus on this. Also, you know, we needed to, for instance, back up the findings that came from the field, from our national consultant field visits. So in some evaluations, we included phone surveys. Also, in tandem to, you know, while conducting field visits, we had analysis of geospatial data, for example. And then for our consultants on the ground, we really had to emphasize the collection of factual data. So in this case, collecting photographic evidence. Indeed, in some evaluations, it was actually the community members themselves who sent photos to the evaluation team. And of course, with smartphones now, this really helped. But again, collecting evidence that nobody could dispute. It wasn't based on impressions or interpretations or opinions. We really had to invest more time in-depth document review, you know, prior to all meetings. Obviously, again, this is something we do, but COVID really made us, you know, we really had to focus on having everything prepared before each meetings well in advance. And there was a lot of emphasis and pressure you know, to really make use of secondary data, to really dig deeper to find as much secondary data and evidence as we could. However, of course, the flip side of all of this, of the, you know, new practices and emphasizing on rigor and credibility, it often meant more demands, more pressure, and more responsibility, ultimately often, you know, for our national consultant colleagues as well. You know, so more time pressure, for example, not only to participate or in some cases lead field visits, but also then to attend remote interviews on Zoom, for example, and more demands for collecting this evidence and data, you know, to take as much photos as possible, to organize them in a very categorical way, and to provide detailed transcripts and of all interviews and meetings. But I'm sure you also had similar experiences, Aurélie, with regard to these challenges. Am I right?
Yeah, actually, yes. And one of the points on which I thought it was really interesting to emphasize was that it pushed us commissioners to go the extra mile, although we were trying to go the extra mile, but it pushed us and it forced us to go the extra mile to find national experts who could be the team's eyes and ears in countries. And largely last year, national experts replaced internationals, and that was a major shift for some offices, or at least an important shift for us. And so, as you mentioned, Owen, it didn't come free of challenges. I think some of our panelists may talk about some of those changes. First of all, working at a distance made it more difficult to build cohesive team. I mean, when you don't have the personal connection and interaction that you normally have during the field mission, that can also has an effect on how the evaluation goes. There's a lot that's exchanged outside the meetings. But also, you mentioned it as well, Owen, is that some evaluation recipients could question the objectivity and the credibility of the findings derived from field data that were composed only of national consultants. And that could be either grounded in some perceptions that either there are evaluation capacity constraints in some developing countries, and that's something I want to come back to in a minute. Or it could be also related to another perception of a potential conflict of interest when you have experts who are in a country before and after and have their networks, etc., which they need to preserve, relationships for future employment, for instance. And conversely, something which is also very important to note is what you also mentioned, not putting national consultants at risk because of that in being embedded into a network where in some contexts independent criticism may not be seen as constructive, but just criticism. And so there are risks that have to be managed. But beyond these challenges, we also really recognize and want to really emphasize that there's a significant progress in building a model that gives a primary role to national experts. And well, first of all, I think Massa also mentioned it. It brings a lot of contextual depth to the evaluation, which experts coming from outside the country can never beat. And also because it also gives more chances for experts from developing countries to be exposed to internationally led evaluations, which has an inbuilt sort of capacity development benefit. And as we just saw, it may help in the long run reduce the questions on credibility related to limited capacity in developing countries for evaluation. We need to overcome those challenges, and there is capacities may not be always on par with international standards in countries. That's true. It's not always true. Far from it. And independence of evaluators wherever they are from always needs to be carefully safeguarded. But all this to say, this last year's experience underscores the urgent need to invest in national evaluation capacity. And obviously there's a long way to go. It's something that builds over time. And I just want to finish by saying, what is it that we as commissioners feel that we could be doing? First of all, I'm looking back on my own experience. When I was a child, I didn't want to be an evaluator. I didn't even know that it existed as a job. And the reason why I learned about it was because a master's teacher told us about it. It was in the curriculum of the university. So, how many universities teach evaluation in DRC, in Cambodia, in Nicaragua? I don't know, but this is one route, one possible route to promote the growth of an evaluation culture in countries. Universities is one route. Professional evaluation societies, BOPIs, are another one. And as well as supporting the understanding of what evaluation is by non-evaluators, people who will manage or receive evaluation. This is part of the growth of an evaluation culture, and there's a lot to be done. One thing that we have been doing in FAO, which is another route, is engaging nationals in evaluation, national consultants who often may not be the first one that we turn to. And that may be another simple way of progressively building capacities along a sort of an exposure, learn by doing logic. But it's not necessarily that we have it on the map of our own theories of change as offices. So I don't know what you think about this, Owen.
No, indeed. I mean, I think this is a discussion we're all having now, you know, in evaluation offices. You know, I think relying more heavily on national expertise, of course, there are, you know, some, you know, it'll require new ways of working, I think, you know, and of course there are different pressures, different challenges, but as Massa said, I think there are, you know, distinct opportunities as well. And, you know, that's why we wanted this discussion today, also to give the floor, to give a space, and we can hear from our colleagues what was their experience. But before I hand over to the panel, we're going to have one quick poll just to understand, you know, this perception of risk, you know, in terms of credibility. So if everyone could quickly just, in your experience, you know, conducting evaluations during COVID-19, what have been the biggest risks, in your view, to the credibility of the evaluation findings? And just select one. If you have an other risk that isn't listed, maybe you could post that in the chat, or indeed we can come back to it later in the questions and answer session. So let's give a few more seconds for people to quickly vote. So the answers are limited or lack of primary data collection. Okay, well, we'll display. Okay, so I think most people perceive actually this lack of primary data collection as the risk. You know, so again, the perception of people in the room is not so much that it's the capacity constraints of national evaluators, which is a good vote of confidence, I think, for, you know, for national consultants as well. And indeed, these other aspects of, you know, having undue pressure or influence on the evaluation findings, again, seen as only a small risk relative to having limited or no or lack of primary data collection. But with that, I think we should, you know, hear from our panelists. So, you know, to better understand how this new dynamic has indeed affected evaluation work on the ground. I'll quickly introduce the panelists. We have, first of all, Dr. Arjman Nizami. Arjman is actually the country director of Helvetas Swiss Intercorporation, an international advisor on environment and climate change. Arjman has worked in the development sector for over 27 years and has designed, led, and evaluated diverse projects with multidisciplinary teams. Arjman most recently was a core team member of the IFAD, Independent Country Strategy and Program Evaluation in Pakistan. She worked with me on that assignment and another colleague, Fumiko Nakai. Next we have Khalid El Harizi, who is a strategic evaluation expert. Khalid is actually a former staff member of IFAD. He was a country program manager in another life, I think, Khalid. And you worked most recently with FAO on this Morocco country program evaluation. Also, you worked with Mustafa, who is our third panel member, Mustafa El Haiba. And Mustafa is a consultant, a specialist in water resources management, a hydrological engineer, and former head of division at the water department in Rabat in Morocco. Along with various other evaluation assignments, he has also, like I said, worked on this FAO country program evaluation in Morocco. So with that, Aurélie, I think you will chair this discussion with the panel, so I'll hand back. Okay, thank you.
Thank you again, Owen. So Arjman, Mustafa, and Khalid, first of all, thank you very much for joining this discussion today. We're very interested in hearing your perspectives as evaluators to see if they complement or clash with what we see in the commissioner side. So maybe first turning to you, Arjman. As you just finished an evaluation with the Independent Office of Evaluation of IFAD, I would like to ask you if you could please talk a little bit about the specific challenges or opportunities that you have seen, anything that you've seen has been different in how you've engaged in evaluation work, over the last year as compared to pre-COVID times? And what would be your key takeaways and any suggestions you have for commissioners from that experience? Over to you, Arjun.
Thank you so much, Johan and Aurelie. I really feel privileged that you invited me to speak at this panel. I think most of the things that I've heard so far pretty much complement what I would have wanted to say. But I will further supplement from my experience. I mean, first of all, the risk highlighted by participants on limited primary data because of COVID-19 restrictions. This particular risk was addressed during an evaluation by national consultants. And surprisingly, we ended up with probably a far larger sample size and meeting far more people than we had probably under the normal circumstances would have thought. And the reason being that we were dealing with another risk, which was called credibility issue, this related to credibility issue, because we were deeply concerned that we have to remain very objective, not to get tangled in either way, either as criticized for having some sort of conflict of interest, or being too critical, and then somebody would say, yeah, because the team was not complete and national consultants didn't collect enough data, so the evaluation is not credible. So we had a double-edged sword, so to speak, and we really had to walk in the middle. So we were really concerned that we should do as much as we can, and of course, it led to the fact that we had to take some calculated risk of getting infected also. But luckily it didn't happen. But so I think this risk mitigation strategy definitely existed. But at the same time, I think there was a great job performed by our team in Italy or abroad by triangulating data, discussing on regular basis, frequent Zoom meetings in which we really went deep down into our data collected from the fields, asking questions. We collected a lot of pictures. We made lots of video clips, which we shared. We probably sort of, made some folders and shared. So every story could really be seen through pictures, etc. So I think something new that happened in this evaluation was really ensuring that a lot of support documents, evidences are collected from the field and presented and shared with our colleagues so that we really make them walk through our data and feel at ease and really stand by us when these data are analyzed and presented in the report. We wanted to really have these data owned by a whole team who could manage to go to the field. So this pressure, of course, it took a lot of pressure on us. I mean, it took a lot of toll on our time to really convert our field information into really credible data. In terms of opportunity, I think it is always the case that national consultants have better access to networks, better access to different government functionaries. We have language, we don't have language barrier. I mean, in my case, I could easily be at ease with women, for example, and really speak with them in their own language, bring them into a comfort zone to really openly, frankly share what they think about the projects. So of course, those advantages would be there always, even under the normal circumstances, normal evaluation. And this is why you have national consultants. But in this specific case, the added element was coordination requirement. Now, colleagues from abroad cannot coordinate everything. There's a limit. We have to end up coordinating a lot of things, which in other normal circumstances, the larger team or the team leader was supposed to do. So our coordination responsibility ranged from high policy officials up to the community, the project coordination team, and everybody. And some local decisions had to take place. So of course, this readiness was also very important for national teams, that they are ready to do it, they're happy to do it, and they really mobilize everyone. And this brings me to the fact that I felt that under a sort of future similar circumstances, it would be very important to also notify or nominate a deputy in the national team. So sometimes it can be a bit challenging for a policymaker or a senior government official for me to connect with them, and they would say, "Who are you?" I'm a member of the evaluation team, but the team leader is abroad. So it is always important to give a bit more official responsibility to this person to maybe coordinate and really see national consultants as a fallback option, because different circumstances can happen. COVID is one. In my case, twice I faced a similar situation due to acute security circumstances in Pakistan, where my colleagues couldn't come and I had to lead the evaluation, once for CEDA, once for Danish Red Cross. And national team actually really offered a fallback arrangement, not to let the evaluation go, but the evaluation was nicely completed. The last thing that I'd like to say is flexibility. I think our evaluation was a success, also because IFAD team, and I'm talking about the whole team at IFAD, the Independent Office of Evaluation, they gave a lot of flexibility to national consultants. It really accommodated our way of thinking and how we thought things would be appropriate. I mean, as much as little things like keeping one car throughout and not to go in rented car. I could use my car properly disinfected, properly loaded with medicines and other sorts of things, disinfectant gadgets, etc., and use it throughout the mission. This was sort of a flexibility in procurement procedure. We had an extra weekend in our hotel during our traveling to really take care of our well-being, be healthy, not to get too tired. These kind of little things, but these had a huge contribution in our morale and also keeping our well-being and really keeping the evaluation on track despite all these challenges. I'll stop here. Maybe I'll come back during the discussion later point.
Thank you very much, Arjuman. That's a lot of messages for us as commissioners, and I think a lot of things that I can recognize also from last year. But maybe I'd like to turn to Mustafa. If you also could share, I mean, you've been until very recently engaged in Morocco in an evaluation of FAO about the country program, and so you were in the same sort of position as Arjuman, but in a different country, different organization. So I'd love to hear about what has been your perspective of the differences, the opportunities, the risks, the challenges, and any takeaways that you would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurélie. Of course, let me say first, that it's really my pleasure to participate in this panel discussion and share with you my experience being, national evaluation consultant for this FAO CPF of last year. And of course, this evaluation we conducted last year, it was conducted in different circumstances compared to other evaluations we conducted in the past in normal conditions because of the pandemic. And in terms of the main constraints we faced while carrying out this evaluation under the pandemic period, is one of the major constraints we faced is to organize field visits, as it was pointed out by Arjuman earlier. It was very hard to organize these field visits to find out about the real achievement of the projects and appreciate the impact of projects on the beneficiaries, farmers, rural populations, farmer cooperatives, and so on. And compare all of these, with what was planned in the project. That was one of the major constraints. And of course, these major constraints could have been, mitigated a little bit if we planned to have some local technicians, to work with the team, under their supervisions to go to the field, local areas, and have some data for us. And also among the main constraints, because in the case of our project, evaluation project in Morocco, this includes a huge program of capacity building, institutional capacity building. Of course, we didn't also have the chance to go and have direct contact with the beneficiaries of this capacity building program, and we didn't have a chance to go and find out about the appreciation and what was the impact of all these capacity building programs, which includes tools, guides, training, and so on. And this also was one of the shortcomings of conducting this evaluation under the pandemic. And also among the main constraints is that we had some difficulties, having dynamic and regular interactions between the team members, like doing regular brainstorming or exchanging findings and advices between all members of the team. This was also one of the constraints conducting this evaluation during the pandemic. In terms of opportunities, that's one of the major opportunities which has been offered to us and should be leveraged in the future is to rely on evaluation local consultants. And of course, this should be leveraged in the future to strengthen the involvement of carefully selected evaluation national consultants and to work under close supervision of evaluation commissions. This is highly beneficial in the long term because it will give the opportunity to build up strong and local competent evaluation local teams. And it will have also a lot of advantages. The fact to rely on local consultant, local evaluation and local national consultants also have the advantage because these consultants, if carefully selected, they are in general in a good position to have a better knowledge of the local context related to the topic of the evaluation. And they could help filter the information gathered from interviews and from the field and from different sources. This one of the advantage of relying on evaluation and national consultants. And also among the new opportunities which have been offered to us during this experience is the development of new approaches and adaptations to adopt them in this new context of them to carry out our evaluation. So if there is a need for the future to integrate carefully all these approaches and applications, which includes remote interviews, online questionnaires, and so on, and to include them or combine them with the traditional evaluations procedures of the pre-COVID period. So this, in principle, should optimize the travels and of international consultants. And of course, yes, one of the constraints, but it didn't happen to our team members. At least it was not very clear, but it's still very potential constraints. Is the fact that being national consultants, we didn't have. It was a little bit hard, to criticize some of the approaches related to the project management or project achievement whatsoever, because being involved with the local administration, we have been network with them. That was a risk. to raise up, clear criticism about these approaches and take them into account. Of course, it was not clear in our cases, as I heard from my colleagues in the evaluation team. But anyway, it's still very potential risk to take it into account for the future. Of course, this risk also, this element also could have, it could also have some opposite effects because of the fact that being a national consultant involved with the administration and the context, maybe it will facilitate you, make your person you're speaking to interviews much more comfortable and tell you the whole truth and give you the real image of the situation. So I would say it has some positive aspect and some negative aspect.
Yeah, I guess all this to be managed so long as we are aware about them. Maybe I'd like to just turn to Khalid, because you were part of the same team, and Khalid was on the other side. He was not able to be in Morocco. He was in Rome and leading the team. So as a team leader, maybe I don't know how you perceived some of the points that Mustafa mentioned.
Yeah, no, and generally I'm very much in line with all what has been said so far, really. Answering the question regarding what are the differences, what I can add here is the methodological input. The bigger difference, I think, is the methodology with which you go. First of all, a strong reliance on secondary data, like it was mentioned, and that seems to be a quick word, but actually in countries like Morocco and many others, I'm sure, there is a wealth of that information. And if you are going to get to any serious analysis of that library of information that we have, and it's going to be rewarding, but it's going to take a lot of time, because these projects are implemented, conceived in a context that itself is dynamic, and some of the outcomes you have on your projects are actually the outcomes of your partners as well. So you need to have a sense. And here we have a kind of limitation, I think, in and I will come back maybe towards the end to some of what Masa said. There is a limitation in the frame of these evaluations, because it is officially, for the case of FMO, evaluating the program and the aid or the assistance, we're still using those words, of FAO to a country. Meanwhile, what we would like to be doing over time is really assessing with the partners what was the outcome of their collaboration and cooperation. And there is a long way to go there. But it's important to realize that it's not just a matter of using a national consultant with the same frame of mind and framework as well to get a different result. The second, so strong reliance on secondary data. And the process itself is almost the reverse from the process we usually take. Usually you go to the field as fast as you can, get a sense of where the whole thing is, and then go back and find in your documentation what you need to fill your gaps. Here is exactly the contrary. You go deep into the secondary data, and you very much focus your interviews and questions, so then you fill in your gaps from the secondary data. It's very interesting to see that. The third point on the methodology has been already underlined, which is not just relying on national consultants because of logistics. We deliberately relied on national consultants because we actually borrow their insight, their knowledge, their experience, their networks. That's what we did, and we did it consciously at the beginning of this mission. And if it was just for the limitation regarding the logistics, they have their own limitation domestically too, due to COVID, as Mustafa and also Arjuman mentioned. So that would be my main point, the difference. Another difference is very high dependence or reliance on team dynamics. You see, it's all the more important if you are with some kind of remote management. You really need to have a team that works, and that team that works doesn't happen by itself. Often these consultants never work together, so you cannot just come and say this is the team. It's a group of people. That's another input that, in this case, the leadership of this mission has performed, and it is quite a job, a rewarding one, but quite a job. And a particular case in point, the consultants have normally very high technical expertise, not necessarily evaluation expertise. It's very difficult to find both in the same person. So that part of the team dynamic is the coaching, tutoring, call it like you want, all through the process. So then you eventually get the quality you are aiming at. Now let me use maybe 1 or 2 minutes to react to the very provoking comments made by Masa at the beginning, if you allow me, Masa. I think you put it right in terms of it's not just because we have COVID, it's just we are committed to a different way of doing business, and we have been committed since a long time. And maybe evaluation was one of the last one to take the train to climb on the train. And I would like just to highlight that this is going to be a long process, which is not going to be overnight solved with national consultants. It's part of it, but it's far from being all of it. I would emphasize the question of culture and partnership. Culture, countries differ very much by their culture. They differ by their attitude towards power distance, how hierarchical a country is. Arjuman, you are not going to contradict me on this one. They differ in relation to masculinity and femininity, on gender. How is that treated? And when you get to evaluate, you have to appreciate those differences. They differ on the tolerance for uncertainty. They differ on the culture of accountability, because evaluation is contributing to a culture of accountability, but it is also dependent on some level of accountability culture. So this is just to speak about the culture. So it means that when you transfer or decentralize evaluation, you will have to do quite a number of different adaptations in different contexts. That's very important to, I think, keep in mind. The partnership, I kind of alluded to it. We cannot go on unilateral evaluation by one partner of what is presented as his program in country so and so. I think that needs to be changed, or at least evolve if we want to go further in this approach that Masa was calling for. And in looking forward, my suggestion would be that a very interesting, a milestone in that process, it would be to support self-evaluations and keep some possibility to validate them from the center as in a first phase that could be long or short. But that's a phase where you build really capacities. You create also a market for that in the country, and then capacities will come as you have more and more opportunities to do that. I hope I was not over my time again.
Thank you so much, Khalid. I don't think you were over your time, and those were very thoughtful ideas that you shared, and the shift in mindset, I think, is a key. I'm just noting that in the chat pod there are no specific questions. Please come off mute. Those on, please, just raise your virtual hand if you want to just ask a question to the panelists. Or do type in questions in the chat pod if you have any on those themes. If you want to share also your perspectives in doing evaluations and on those themes of involving national consultants. Since I don't see questions so far, and maybe I'm not seeing the little hands, Renata, correct me if I'm wrong. I just wanted to give a chance, especially Arjuman, since you spoke first, if you wanted to react on any of the things that were said by Mustafa and Khalid.
I think we may have lost Arjuman. Arjuman's feed is frozen.
Right.
Oh, that's okay.
She'll come back.
Yeah. No, indeed. I mean, I kind of had a general question for the panelists as well. You know, this kind of, you know, when there are like, let's say, assumptions that the evaluation on the credibility of the evaluation, you know, because the international team members couldn't travel, you know, indeed, how did you deal with that, or how can we best rebut that, you know, even if it is just this perception? You know, from my experience, you know, in fact, we tended to work even harder to prove that the evaluation was credible. You know, more work went in, and it's interesting that, you know, the first most the largest response in the poll was indeed that people didn't have access to primary data. But again, I'd be interested to know, you know, how then do we overcome that? Just before maybe I see Ian Hopwood, you have your hand up. So Ian, maybe let's hear from you, and then we can refer back to the panel. I see Monica as well. So Ian.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Greetings from Senegal, from Dakar. I already had a small point. I very much enjoyed the interaction between the two sort of voices from Rome and the Moroccan end, and I thought them very interesting and very valuable insights that were generated, which don't just relate to COVID, but relate to a lot of other elements of evaluation practice. And I'm on the board of the African Evaluation Journal. And we really want this type of practical, you know, exchange. I think this type of dialogue about the real nitty-gritty, the granular aspects of, and the relations of the national, the international, many of the themes you touched upon. And perhaps you've already published this in some of your own journals and so on, but the African Evaluation Journal would be very interested in getting articles from our speakers, from anybody else who's signed up for this session. So I just wanted to do a little bit of promotion for that. Having said that, I'm also with the Senegal Evaluation Association, so we're very interested also in collaborating with FAO and other structures in helping to strengthen this local evaluation community, which can be engaged in looking at the overall dimension of development interventions and not just looking at individual projects with flags on them. So thank you for an interesting session. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. And I see Monica, my colleague from IFAD, Independent Office of Evaluation, you have your hand up. So Monica, please, yes.
Thank you. Very interesting insights, of course, from the two first speakers, my colleagues at FAO and IFAD, but also the panelists with your views from the field. As Renata said, tomorrow we will have a similar session in French. As you know, there is this language divide where we are going to try to go on and speak. And I think one thing that emerged with the colleagues who did not join today because of this language divide that I wanted to share with you, and I wanted to get your views, the views of the panelists about that, was that of course they said that one of the big advantages was all the time that that was saved in interpretation because national consultants were directly interacting, especially with beneficiaries in their local languages. But also it was very interesting that in one of the countries, tomorrow we are going to share the experience in Burundi, also in Morocco and in Niger. And in one country, it was a good thing to be a national consultant because people feel like calmer to speak up. But in other countries, that was a constraint because they prefer to talk to someone external because they thought, oh, maybe you are part of the government and I'm going to have any kind of retaliation if I speak up. So I wanted to raise this point, and of course it's very context specific, but the good and the bad sides of being an outsider or a too much an insider, like someone from the country or from the region where you are conducting the interviews or the focus group. So I wanted just to raise this point for discussion. Thank you very much, and I hope that whoever speaks French and is interested in continuing the discussion will join us tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe over to our panelists then. Does anyone want to come back on any of those? Arjuman, I see you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
I fully recognize what Monica just said. And I think we must not be giving a message that that national consultants can solve all the problems and this adaptive management is totally in favor of the evaluation. There is a very strong need also to balance the knowledge from outside and knowledge which is in the country. And this balance basically really has a very good interplay. In my personal case, I think I was fully advantaged that in the fields I could easily open up people, speak their language, quickly get them to the, frankly sharing their ideas. But sometimes I felt that, at the high level policy level respondents or people say from IFAD's own project management regime, it was always useful to have both external and internal perspectives. Internal because we knew their policies, we knew the stories behind, but external because some of the questions could be very innocently asked, which we couldn't have asked. So I think this complementarity could be very useful. And we fill this gap through Zoom meetings. Their Zoom meetings with all of us were very useful. And we even fed in the information that please ask these questions or these are the policies. So I think I fully recognize what you're saying. And since we are talking and I have the opportunity that I'm talking right now, it's the future. I think in terms of future, of course, I recognize what was said earlier, but in addition, I recognize that the commissioners probably are also interested now in the research element of the projects. I think the future evaluations would not be very strict evaluations on whether you have achieved the project or not, and all those milestones, outputs and outcomes, but also in terms of really understanding the deep dynamics of approaches, whether they work or not and why they don't work. So I call it a research sort of element, probably would get stronger, and therefore methodologies would become stronger. The whole behavior towards evaluation, the whole behavior with which you walk the evaluation in the fields probably would change. Not change, but at least would have to be brought in as evaluation.
Okay, no, thank you, Arjun. I'm looking at the time. We are just 2 minutes away from the end of the session. I'm not sure if the other panelists you wanted to add. I do have to hand back to Masahiro for closing remarks, but Mustafa, Khalid, are we okay?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Okay. Well, look, thank you very much from me. I'll hand back to Masa and Renata, but thank you to our panelists for sharing so openly your experiences. And indeed, it's a conversation we need to have more. So, Masa, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody, Mustafa, Anjuman, and Khalid in particular, but also all the participants for listening to us. The time is really short because it's a very interesting topic. And a lot of things said resonates with me. I'm actually started a practice when we look, it depends on the evaluation. When we evaluate some technical programs that is implemented globally, we normally have international team leaders who are technical experts as well and so on. But when it concerns the countries and field evaluation that need to reflect on the context and the reality of the country. I always try not to bring in international consultants and have a national team leader actually lead the evaluations with me, the evaluation manager, also participating as a co-leader of the evaluations. And that was a particular model I started practice about 12, 13 years ago. And I found myself, as Khalid said, when I speak to some people in the country, it's better led by my senior national team colleague because they know how to speak, they know how to phrase it. It's a culture of things that Mustafa and also Anjuman has pointed out. And also in a way that we rely on the national team members and especially the team coordinator as a leader of the national team, maybe we should really rephrase the national consultant as a national team leader or co-leader and give a little bit room for recruiting. For example, local consultants who can speak that language or who can live in that region, etc., etc. So we have to think differently to give a little bit more ownership of our evaluation activities to our national colleagues and be confident about that. And then in my case, I brought in the international and institutional perspective because I understand that part better than our national counterparts. So we together could come up with a very interesting amalgamation of the perspectives, and that I wanted to just put as a final remark. And thank you very much. I really enjoyed this conversation. And for everybody listening to us, please, we are open also in EvalForward to any of these continuing discussions. So let me hand over to Renata.
Thanks, Maza, and thanks to all. It was really interesting discussion, really, as it has been said. 1 hour is short, but it's a very busy week, and it's hard to keep people for more than 1 hour. So I thank you all, and I invite those who are not registered to EvalForward. I posted the link on the chat to join us, because this is the platform where we have also this kind of discussions in different ways, online, via webinars, via blogs, etc. So thank you all, and follow, for those who are Francophone, the event tomorrow that Monica is promoting, and see you next time. Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.